Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 24th, 2023. Well, what I'm going to talk about today is the brewing crisis, the developing crisis, not just in Gaza and the Middle East, but worldwide. While all eyes are on the Gaza situation right now, with the question being, will Netanyahu go ahead and launch a ground invasion, a scorched earth offensive with the goal of exterminating Hamas, in which he's essentially designated all Palestinian civilians as either supporters of terror or sympathizers with terror. Will they carry that out? Will they go ahead and do it? The Biden administration supposedly is urging them to wait, but what good will that do if they're still going to do it? At the same time, the U.S. has two carrier strike groups in the region, a total of 10,000 troops, another 2,000 on standby, warnings to Iran, to Syria, to Hezbollah and Lebanon. And so we're looking at what could become a World War III very quickly. Now, there have been attempts by many nations to mediate this. There was a conference in Cairo, but the solutions that were proposed were mostly to deal with the humanitarian crisis and not to stop it. But they did call for a ceasefire. The Russians, the Chinese, and others have called for a ceasefire. The Chinese are calling for a peace conference for the whole region, which is not only about stopping war, but about economic development, about collaboration by all parties in major projects which will benefit all people living in the region. So you have a solution or a series of solutions being presented, but so far the Biden administration is insisting it's going to stick with Israel. It's going to continue to back Ukraine. It's put in a proposal for another $100-something billion of spending, most of which is for Ukraine, another $10.8 billion for Israel, plus the $3.8 already given Israel every year. So the Biden administration is pushing for this to go ahead and asserting that not to do this would be a surrender to authoritarian and dictatorships and terrorists. And now the U.S. has a new military strategy document, which essentially defines or assumes simultaneous wars with Russia and China. Now, how is that possible? The U.S. now has a $33 trillion deficit, and it's growing at an accelerating rate, a historic expansion of debt. The bond market is now largely being dominated by hedge fund operators who are turning U.S. bonds into speculative instruments. Wall Street on Parade had an article yesterday reporting on a new crisis hitting regional banks, and that's expected to get much worse. And inflation is back in the United States. Meanwhile, in Europe, you have accelerating deindustrialization in Germany and economic problems everywhere, including the danger of more immigration if these wars continue. So who benefits from this policy? Who is the beneficiary of the policy of permanent war and an ongoing looting process against the poorer nations, but also against the middle class in the north and western sectors? Well, what sector is doing well? The military-industrial complex. No big surprise there. Lockheed Martin stock went up 9% last week. Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon, which gave us the current Secretary of Defense, they're all going up in their stock valuations. Their profits are up. And the Pentagon has just announced $150 billion in new contracts. Again, where's that going? Well, we're told it's going to go to spending in the United States, but it doesn't trickle down to the average person. It stays in the hands of the corporate cartels of the military-industrial complex. And now these same cartels are financing a revival of the group that was called PNAC, the Project for a New American Century. There was the Bush-Cheney team that cooked up the idea of the Iraq War and put the United States into permanent warfare. They've got some new organizations they've created that include the same old personnel. Elliott Abrams, who never met a war he couldn't support. Douglas Feith, Scooter Libby, who is Dick Cheney's chief of staff. They're all involved in a drive that is aimed at restoring control of the Republican Party to the neocons. That is, taking away from those who oppose war, those who are part of the MAGA or America First movement, who don't want the United States embroiled in permanent war. They're trying to remove them and restore the Republican Party as a war hawk party. And how are they going to do that? They're going to do it by using the crisis in Israel. And this is because they were threatened when opposition increased to the spending for Ukraine, which is what's been going on. Now 56% of the American people say we've done enough for Ukraine. The House of Representatives had a rebellion and threw out the speaker over the Ukraine funding. So now they're saying, no, we've got to restore the idea of America as the sole superpower, and we'll use Israel versus Hamas to do it, because everyone hates Hamas, is their thinking, and everyone supports Israel, and if you don't support Israel, you're an anti-Semite. So that's what's coming out of this PNAC crowd. And they're doing tours around the country featuring people like Senator Joni Ernst and Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley's, her slogan is change the Department of Defense to the Department of Offense and make nations feel threatened, fearful of the power of the United States. Is that what we want? We want nations to be scared to turn against us if it's something that's right because of our military power that can be deployed. Well, that's the status quo. That's what the United States has been doing. That's what the unipolar order is all about. That's why the world is breaking out of that and shifting away from it. But these neocons want to take over the Republican Party again, take it away from Trump, take it away from people who say we shouldn't be fighting Russia in a proxy war in Ukraine, and return it to the steady hands of the war hawks. Now, the question is, they're convinced that American voters will support that. If you're unwilling to allow this drive for war and depression to succeed, now is the time to speak out. War and depression only benefit a small sector of the population, namely those tied to the corporate cartels. That's why today, silence is not an option. I've just been reading Leah Rabin's memoir to her husband Yitzhak called Our Life, His Legacy, where she wrote about the silence that allowed his assassins to build a climate in which it was possible not just to kill Rabin, but to sabotage the Oslo Accords. And in a eulogy she gave days after his assassination, she said that the people, quote, were too silent in the face of the writing on the wall, of the shrieked insults and the horrifying incitement. They were silent. She went on to say, now there can be no more silence. Now the voice of reason and right will be heard. Now the silent majority will become a majority no longer silent. Unfortunately, we face a crisis today of horrible proportions because too many of you have remained silent. The idea of speaking up for what's right and truthful is at the center of whether or not a democratic republic can succeed. Silence is not an option. That must change. And I'd urge you to circulate the petition that will be at the bottom of the description page and work with us. Help us build a true majority of people who recognize that it's the greatness of America depends on the goodness of the nation and our ability to create a mutually beneficial relationship with all nations and all peoples in the world. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.